A beggar lived at a city railway station, surviving by asking for money from passengers on passing trains. Every day, he would walk along the platforms, approaching travelers with outstretched hands, hoping for a few coins to fill his stomach. His life had been the same 4 years, with no hope for change. One day, while begging as usual, he noticed a tall, well-dressed man stepping off a train. The man looked wealthy and respectable. The beggar immediately thought, "This man must be rich. If I ask him, he will surely give me a good amount." Excited by this thought, the beggar approached the man and stretched out his hand, asking for money. However, instead of giving him anything, the tall man paused and looked at him carefully. He then asked, "You are always asking people for things, but have you ever given anything to anyone?" The beggar, surprised by the question, replied, "Sir, I am just a beggar. I always ask others for help. I have nothing to give." The man shook his head and said, "If you cannot give anything, you have no right to ask." He then stepped onto the train and left, leaving the beggar in deep thought. One day, while begging at the railway station, the beggar noticed a tall man dressed in an elegant suit. He thought to himself, "This man looks very wealthy. If I ask him for money, he will surely give me a good amount." With this thought, he approached the man and asked for alms. The tall man looked at him and asked, "Do you always beg? Have you ever given anything to anyone?" The beggar was surprised by the question. He replied, "Sir, I am just a beggar. I always ask from people. I have nothing to give anyone." Hearing this, the tall man smiled and said, "If you have nothing to give, then you have no right to ask. I am a businessman, and I only believe in trade. If you can give me something in return, only then will I give you something." Saying this, the businessman boarded the train and left. The beggar was left standing there, lost in thought. The words of the businessman echoed in his mind. He began to wonder if the reason he received so little was that he never gave anything in return. But then another thought struck him. "I am a beggar. What do I have to give?" After the conversation with the businessman, the beggar couldn't stop thinking about his words. He realized that maybe the reason he wasn't receiving much money was that he had nothing to offer in return. The businessman's idea of give and take started to make sense to him. However, this realization brought a new challenge. What could a beggar possibly give to others? He had no possessions, no skills, and no valuable items. He spent 2 days pondering over this question, but couldn't find an answer. The thought of continuously asking for money without offering anything in return began to trouble him. He started questioning his own existence. How long will I continue living like this? Will I always remain just a beggar? He wanted to change, but he didn't know how. On the 3rd day, while sitting near the station, he noticed some beautiful flowers blooming nearby. An idea struck him: why not give flowers to the people who gave him money? This thought excited him, and he quickly gathered some flowers. From that moment, every time someone gave him money, he handed them a flower in return. This small change was the beginning of a new journey for him. After thinking for several days, the beggar noticed some flowers blooming near the train station. An idea struck him: why not give flowers in return for the money he received? He liked the thought and immediately picked some flowers. The next time he went to beg, he did something different. Whenever someone gave him money, he handed them a flower in return. Surprisingly, people accepted the flowers with joy. They smiled and kept the flowers with them. Day by day, more and more people started giving him money. He realized that as long as he had flowers, people were willing to give him more. But whenever the flowers ran out, the money he received also decreased. This pattern continued, and he began to understand a simple truth: people like to receive something in return for what they gave. This small change in his approach made a big difference in his life. He no longer felt like just a beggar. He was now providing something of value. This experience made him think deeper. What if he could do more than just giving flowers? Could he turn this into something bigger? The second encounter with the businessman. One day, while begging on the train, the beggar saw the same tall businessman who had inspired him to change. Excited, he quickly approached him and said, "Today, I have something to give you. If you give me some money, I will give you flowers in return." The businessman smiled and handed him some money. In exchange, the beggar gave him a few fresh flowers. The businessman was impressed and said, "Wow, this is amazing. Today, you have become a businessman just like me." These words struck deep in the beggar's heart. He kept thinking about what the businessman had just said. He was no longer just a beggar, he was now someone who traded something valuable in return for money. He felt an overwhelming sense of happiness and realization. Looking up at the sky, his eyes shone with newfound confidence. "I am not a beggar," he whispered to himself. "I am a businessman. I can become rich." People around him thought he had gone mad, but he didn't care. For the first time, he saw himself differently. He understood that success was not about waiting for help, but about creating value. That night, he made the biggest decision of his life. He would never beg again. The next day, he was no longer seen at the station. He had disappeared, but not as a failure he had left to build his future. The lesson of give and take had changed his life forever. 6 months later, the beggar returned to the train station, but this time, he looked completely different. He was no longer dressed in rags, he now wore a well-tailored suit, polished shoes, and carried a confident smile. He was no longer a beggar, he had transformed into a successful businessman. As he walked along the platform, he saw the tall businessman who had once changed his life. Excited, he approached him and extended his hand. The businessman, puzzled, hesitated for a moment. "Do you remember me?" the former beggar asked. The businessman shook his head. "I don't think we've met before." The man smiled and said, "Think again. We have met not once, but twice before." The businessman looked closely, and suddenly, recognition flashed in his eyes. "Oh, you were the beggar I once refused to give money to. And the second time, I bought flowers from you." "Yes," the man nodded. "But today, I am no longer a beggar. I am a businessman. I sell flowers in bulk now, and I am on my way to another city for business." The businessman was astonished. "That's incredible. How did this happen?" The man explained, "You taught me a powerful lesson. We only receive when we give. I realized that people weren't giving me money out of pity, they were paying for the flowers. I was never a beggar. I was always a businessman. I just didn't know it yet." The two businessmen shook hands, smiling as they walked off the platform, discussing their businesses like equals. The story teaches us a powerful lesson about the give and take principle. To receive more in life, we must first learn to give. The beggar initially believed he had nothing to offer, but once he found something valuable to share, flowers, his entire life changed. Another key lesson is that our mindset determines our success. If we constantly see ourselves as small or unworthy, we will remain in the same place. However, if we shift our perspective and believe in our potential, we can achieve great things. The beggar always saw himself as poor and dependent on others, but once he started thinking like a businessman, he became one. Moreover, self-worth comes from within. People did not give him money out of pity, they paid for the value he provided. The moment he realized this, he stopped being a beggar and became an entrepreneur. This shift in thinking led to his transformation. Ultimately, the story reminds us that success is hidden in our thoughts. If we dream big, believe in ourselves, and take action, we can rise above any circumstances and reach new heights in life.